Welcome back to Paterson. You know the Pat in Paterson is for you. It's actually not true, but Sheriff, America's Sheriff.
Lots of brass here, lots of brass.
Sheriff. Councilman, how are you, my brother? You was visiting.
Sheriff, please.
So they
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's balance it out. Bookend.
come on, chiefs.
Okay, we ready? Let's do this. Good, Steve? Yeah? Okay. Morning.
Good morning.
For over 2 years, we've been fighting a deadly virus and a rise in gun violence. And gun violence has been an epidemic within this pandemic. But as individuals, leaders who have been on the front line, our goal has been to save lives and to keep the people that we protect and serve out of harm's way. Sadly, there have been far too many people that have been victims of senseless gun violence. As a matter of fact, we have our share of heartbreaking stories in Paterson. In fact, Detective Captain Pat Murray, I can remember December 13th, 2020, had a 15-year-old young lady just sitting on her porch, and she was hit by a stray bullet. And when I talked to her father, which I saw him on Saturday, he tells me she doesn't even want to go back on the porch. Then on July 1st, 2021, 75-year-old woman going to get her medicine from a pharmacy. Gets back to her apartment, and someone says, "You have blood in your hair." She didn't even know she was shot and hit by a stray bullet. Then this year, January 19th, Robert Quadra, an 18-year-old with a very promising future. In fact, he just received word that he was going to get a full-ride scholarship to Montclair State University. And he was helping his grandmother with her groceries, and he got caught in a crossfire and lost his life, leaving his grandmother to grieve and his mother to mourn. Well, we don't want any grandmothers to grieve anymore. We don't want mothers to mourn. We don't want anyone to have to undergo such tragedy in their lives. And Assemblyman, you know well, 2014, we had a 12-year-old, Genesis Rincon, hit by a stray bullet, lost her life. Year later, Nazria Bug, 14-year-old with a promising future, she was struck by a bullet and lost her life as well. And then Amani Sexton, who I thought could have made it to the NBA, was also a victim of senseless gun violence. And so today, we're standing in solidarity against the senseless gun violence. I'm wearing my pin, Mayors Against Illegal Weapons, Illegal Firearms. I want to thank Michael Bloomberg, who's led the charge and who's been an ally here in the city of Paterson with his nonprofit organization, Every Town for Gun Safety. And I wear orange. There was a young lady, a 15-year-old in Chicago, Hadia Pendleton, and in 2013, as a matter of fact, it was January 29th, she lost her life a week after she performed in President Obama's second inaugural activities. And after she lost her life, her friends took to wearing the color orange. This is what hunters wear so that they're not shot. And so today I wear orange in her memory and in memory of all those that have been victims of senseless gun violence. So today we've done something significant here in New Jersey.
That's right.
Bail reform. Yes, in the true spirit of the law, it does help low-level offenders, anyone who's been incarcerated because they didn't pay a parking ticket or perhaps they were late with the child support. But we're not talking about those individuals. We're talking about violent offenders who continue to repeat those offenses. Those individuals that have been arrested for having an illegal firearm, they shouldn't be released back on the street so they could become either the next shooter or the next shooting victim. And so it's fitting with the Graves Act that pertains to a variety of offenses with firearms. Frank X. Graves, the former mayor of Paterson and state senator, in his honor and in his memory, we want to continue to make sure that our streets are safer, because a safer city makes for a stronger city. And so we want to thank the leadership in the legislature. We want to thank the governor for signing this bail reform into law. It's a minor change, but hopefully will have a major impact so that fewer families are mourning the loss of their loved ones. This time I want to call forward Paterson's own, who was the sponsor on the Assembly side of this legislation, the Assemblyman Benji Wimberly.
Thank you.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank Governor Phil Murphy for signing this A2426 and the Senate version into law. Senator Joe Cryan for really navigating all of the amendments. And as you know, the senator has a background in law enforcement, so that was very helpful during his time. But more importantly, for the innocent folks that we see gunned down, not just here in New Jersey, but throughout the United States. The gun violence has, if you turn on the news, you know it's going to be the lead story, unfortunately. And, the mayor said, Genesis Rincon, and we were very upset, and we marched, and we said this is going to be the end of it. And before you know, it was Nazare Bug, another young promising life, and Armani Sexton, who was ranked the #1 basketball player in the country in his class the year he was killed. And it goes on and on and on. And it's from New York to Chicago to LA that these senseless gun violent acts continue. And there's no coincidence that this is a federal issue. It doesn't take a genius to figure out where the guns are coming up and down the I-95, 85 corridor, where folks get them and bring them into cities, and particularly the 5 major cities here in New Jersey, where you will find most of the gun violence. It doesn't take any genius to figure out where the violence is happening. You know that it's going to be the Newarks, the Patersons, the Jersey cities, the cities that unfortunately that have heavy transient populations. So we look forward to working with law enforcement to continue to make laws that are going to be safety measures for all residents. Nobody should sit on a porch. Nobody innocently should be loading their bag, car with groceries and being gunned down. And the one thing I will say, this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. This is not a white, black issue. Bullets do not have tags on them. They can hit anybody at any time. So this is not a political grandstand to say that we're going to have a press conference to say A2426. No, this is a life-saving measure for many folks probably when this bill is signed into law. So, Mayor, I thank you for hosting it. I thank the urban mayors for coming together and being a voice in Trenton to make this move. And I hope this moves on to the federal level, that we have more gun safety measures that will save lives. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you.
And Coach, you're right. I mean, the virus doesn't discriminate, and neither does violence. At this time, I'll call forward a champion for public safety. The Assemblyman alluded to him earlier as having a background in law enforcement. He was a former sheriff himself, and he really has taken the bull by its horns, and he's really championed this, especially in his chamber of the state legislature. And he's a friend of Paterson, and quite frankly, a staunch champion for public safety in the state of New Jersey, and that's Senator Joe Cryan.
I want to thank the mayor for hosting us today. Mayor, thank you for your leadership. The one thing about this bill that I'm particularly proud of is the fact that Andre won't text or call anymore. All right? Because I can tell you, an unending advocacy for the safety of the citizens of Paterson and the safety of the citizens of the safe. And thank you very, very much for doing that. Thank you. And on behalf, the urban mayors that Benji alluded to have come together with a consolidated voice to make sure that this was a bill that we could find common ground and work through. And I think it's really important that we've obviously had it. And I want to thank my friend Benji Wimberly. We don't get this done, frankly, unless we work together. That's right. And frankly, your patience, your perseverance, and your dedication to making sure that this bill got done, I'd really like you to give Benji Wimberly a nice round of applause. I had the honor of being in the assembly and maybe participating a little bit when what we call bail reform now was actually passed into law and implemented. I was an undersheriff at the time. And, you know, the vote itself obviously had a lot of different ramifications at the time. But as somebody, the jail in Union County didn't work for the sheriff. It wasn't part of the sheriff's organization chart. But you would look at it each day. You'd look at the pops. You'd look at the things that matter because it mattered to you being right next door and for your officers as well. And you could see those numbers grow. And then you would look, and you guys all know this, you would see, for example, right, Sheriff, you would see folks that were here for 400 days, 500 days, and you'd look and you'd say, what's the problem, right? And you realize, obviously, your county jail was never meant to be that, right? So you'd obviously work with the state. Some of it you would argue was transportation, some of it you would argue, but ultimately what you knew what it was is it was simply unfair. So we worked through those issues, and on bail reform, my friend Bonnie Watson-Coleman, who's now a congresswoman, was relentless as well, as Benji may remember. And in those days, when we passed it, there was a lot of debate. But when we passed it, it was always supposed to be a living, breathing document, a flexible document, a document to the times. And the times have changed. Right? Now, we know that bail reform in New Jersey, I believe, has set a national standard. You've all seen the cases around the country where there's been particular issues where, frankly, other states haven't done as well. But let's face it, it's a system. And as folks like the sheriff know, as folks like Jerry know, criminals know how to work any system, right? They can tell you their points, and we all know this, right? And sure. Nonviolent and all the things that go with it. But you knew deep down that while we wanted bail reform to be more fair for people, nobody should be in jail for 800 days because they couldn't come up with $1,500 in bail. Nobody should do that. You also knew that our citizens were the first and the most important part of bail reform. And as you look and we watch violence increase around this country and around this state, because you know what? 15-year-olds are supposed to be able to sit on their porch. Senior citizens are supposed to be able to go to the store and not get shot. And those changes in priority and in society made this bill important. The public, not only just the urban mayors who are in touch with their constituents, and Mayor, your constituents just reaffirmed that, being in touch and understanding that your constituents want safety first became critically important. But getting the first bill done to modify bail reform, not about me, but let's face it, there was fair amount to say, there was a lot of reluctance along the way because folks felt like this issue and this success was potentially threatened. We built a coalition, frankly, Benji did. We built a coalition that included the administrator of the courts. I want to thank Glenn Grant, the ACLU. You get started, you get in trouble. PBAs. But folks came together to make a bill that we originally introduced and made it better. So what does it mean? It means that when you look at the multi-thousand crime victims of gun violence or a crime that's committed with a weapon, that this bill ultimately will hopefully incarcerate a few hundred of those folks because of the percentages of what they are, the multi-users, the folks who use firearms in a crime. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, because in the legislature, there's a lot of debate about can we reform folks, can we not? Think about it for a minute, whether it's a 15-year-old on a porch, or whether it's that 75-year-old lady coming back from a store. And I think what's important about this bill is we decided to think about our citizens. We decided that our citizens come first. That the residents, whether they're a city, and Benji mentioned the facts and the statistics that go with that, but that our citizens' safety comes first. And that we've had enough. And that because we've had enough, we are going to commit together to do so. And we did. The bill passed significantly, again, thanks to your leadership in the Assembly, and despite me, it got through the Senate. But I can't emphasize it enough. A living, breathing document, it's one of the things I'm proudest of in terms of what the legislature is supposed to do. You're supposed to make laws and then understand the times you're in and make those laws work for the times you're in. And we've all had enough. I don't want to point to out-of-state shootings. I want to think about 15-year-olds. I want to think about 75-year-olds. Obviously, in the 20th District, we have folks that we can think of too. Every story, every town can think of someone who's been unfairly treated and watch that perpetrator walk out the door.
That's right.
Well, you know what today? They do not walk out the door anymore. And that's what's important. I really want to thank Governor Murphy, and I do want to tie it in a little bit to the governor's 3.0 gun package. People say to me, oh, is this the silver bullet? Is this the one? No one bill changes everything. No one bill. But you create a culture, and the legislature is part and parcel and partner with any governor that creates a culture of safety that says we won't tolerate it anymore. So when people say this bill won't do it or that bill, you're darn right, no one bill will. But every bill matters, because when you continue to commit to the safety of your citizens, you could continue to commit to our citizens and our communities getting the best that they can be, to thrive, to be able to have 15-year-olds get off a porch and be able to go to a park for recreation, for a 75-year-old grandmother to be able to enjoy her grandchildren. Because that's what this is fundamentally about. And I really want to thank all my colleagues in the legislature, and I really want to thank, besides the urban mayors, I really want to give a special shout out to the man behind me. This bill, I think it's safe to say, Benji, doesn't happen. This bill does not happen without the Mayor of Paterson, without Mayor Sayak, plain and simple. And my last comment is this. We've all seen enough violence. Tired of turning on the TV and seeing it. We all want responses that matter, but most importantly, we want a culture in our state, a culture of safety. And this bill again today brings the culture of safety to our state that we are going to continue to commit to for the days and years ahead. Thank you very much.
Senator, on behalf of the City of Paterson, I want to thank you for your leadership, and on my behalf, thank you for your friendship as well. And I'm tired of the violence as well. I drive my daughters to school every day. I can't even listen to 1010 Wins anymore because my eldest, Sophia, asked me, why are there so many shootings? I quite frankly don't have any answers. Sometimes I tell them that people don't know how to resolve their conflicts and guns get in their hands. Something like road rage, where perhaps it was just an obscene gesture. Now it's more than just an obscene gesture. It's someone taking out a firearm. So at this time, I want to call forward a gentleman who's representing the New Jersey Sheriff's Association, our neighbor in Bergen County, Sheriff Anthony Cureton.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? All right, it's such a great opportunity to stand here, and we're going to give acknowledgement to Mayor Saya, give acknowledgement to our legislators who saw the importance of pushing this bill through. I'm pretty sure we all share the same sentiments of waking up every morning and have to hear about a shooting. I don't know about you. I sit there and think that tomorrow it may be a family member. Tomorrow, it may be that 15-year-old we're talking about. Only way we're going to stop this crime is to follow through like the legislators did with this bill. And it's so critical that we have to unify together, not only legislative, but law enforcement-wise, to go out there and get in front of it. We know the importance of bail reform, as the senator has said, but safety of our community is first and foremost, and we need to get out there and make sure we provide the necessary resources to the officers, and that's in the bill, and we go out there and do steady enforcement. So on behalf of the New Jersey Sheriff's Association, President Gannon, we stand together as sheriff, as the law enforcement community, to make sure that all communities are protected, and we'd like to thank the legislator, the 5 urban mayors, led by the Mayor Sehal, for championing this cause. Thank you.
I also want to acknowledge our Passaic County Sheriff, Richard H. Burdnick. As a matter of fact, later this week we'll be unveiling our plan to continue to focus on public safety because it is paramount in Paterson, so stay tuned for that important announcement. Thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate your support here in the city. The next individual we're going to hear from said to me a few years ago, and I'm just going to call you out for saying it because you texted it to me again, I told you so. It's one of those expressions, right? I hate to tell you I told you so, but I told you so. You talked about bail reform, what problems it could potentially pose as far as unintended consequences are concerned. And so our state PBA president, Pat Culligan, has also been an advocate to get us to this point where we can say that violent offenders should be kept behind bars.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined by our state PBA president, Pat Culligan.
I'd like to echo the senators. The mayor doesn't text at 2 in the afternoon. The mayor texts at 11:30 at night, 6:30 in the morning. Never in the afternoon. But look, my father taught me never to gloat and never to say "I told you so." But as you know, I did it in this case. When bail reform was presented to the state PBA, we were 100% behind it, because at the time we thought it was. As was said before, the $100 warrant on a Friday night is not getting out all weekend long. But we never expected the length and the breadth of people that were released under bail reform. And I just want to point out that gun violence, putting a gun in your belt is not a crime of convenience. Picking up an iPhone on the bus is a crime of convenience. Writing out a script for an opiate that's false is there's nothing violent about that. But putting on a gun in the morning or at night is you're expecting to use that gun. And those folks do not belong getting released under the bail reform. So there wasn't a law enforcement officer in the entire state of New Jersey who thought that the length and breadth that this got to was a good idea. And it's good to see, as we said, it's a living document, and the violence those folks have to stay in jail. So I applaud, and I agree, it was the mayor, and then everybody realizing that it was the right thing to do. So we applaud this, and we hope that it continues to be a living document, and we're open on the violent end of bail reform. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. I want to acknowledge our PBA president. Thank you, PBA President Alex Cruz. Thank you for joining us. Our SOA president, Mason Marr. We have from our department, our public safety director, Jerry Spezial. We also have our police chief, Ibrahim Mike Bekora, joined by our deputy chief, Bert Ribeiro, and the detective captain from the ceasefire unit that investigates shootings, non-fatal shootings in the city of Paterson. And that's a gentleman we really appreciate. 36 years on the force, Patrick Murray. Senator Cryan alluded to the fact that this was something that crossed party lines, as far as going across the other aisle and saying, look, we need to come together on this issue, because this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. It's an American issue. It's a New Jersey issue. It's a matter of life or death. And so in the Senate, I believe, Senator, you were able to get unanimity. Not a single senator voted against this bill.
Nice.
Thank you. In the Assembly, you had a few that we gotta talk to them. But we really appreciate the fact that Regina Egea was here last October, I believe it was October 28th, and she brought Bill Bratton with her, and he talked about bail reform, and he talked about how we can also reduce gun violence in other ways. And so Regina Egea, who is now the president of the Garden State Initiative, was very instrumental in getting us to this point where we can reform bail reform. So at this time, I'd like to hear from Regina Egea.
Well, thank you. And I really want to add thanks to Assemblyman Wimberly and Senator Cryan and Governor Murphy for signing the bill, because it was definitely not a straight road that it went down, and had lots of winding turns. And their support, unwavering support, was essential. And, I worked with the mayor, as he mentioned, back in the fall, but really we began a conversation about economic prosperity in Paterson. And where it has to begin is safety, and that's really what today is about. And we'll continue to work with the city of Paterson in growing and prosperous situation for all the citizens. And it's something that will work even more urban areas. So thank you, Mayor, for your partnership and for your leadership in creating more prosperous urban areas in the state of New Jersey. Thank you.
Our last speaker is no stranger to gun violence. He's seen his ward gripped by shootings, senseless shootings. but he's been on the front line, like all of us, advocating for reform, and that is the 5th Ward Councilman Luis A. Velez.
Assemblyman, you're a champion. Senator and your senators are champions. Those mayors stand in front of the line to lobby it on behalf of the constitution of Paterson and around the state of New Jersey. They are champions. We in the city council, I sit in the public safety. There's a word that I always go to remember from Pat Murray and from our director. We need to have legislation with teeth. That means when they get it, they will get it. So Captain Pat Murray, thank you for all the work that you do around the clock. And to the officers under your leadership and under the leadership of the deputy chief and the chief and the PBA, our members, thank you, because this will be a relief for the hard work that you guys do in Paterson and those that are there in their different cities that do the work. Sometimes your hands are tied. You are arrested today, and the next day they was in the street committing the same crime, and sometimes getting away from the crime, and it's hard to get them. But now Paterson, we lost a kid this past weekend, Mayor. Somebody drive, asked his name, shot him to death. Sad. We don't want to see it anymore. So the residents of Paterson, now we have to cooperate. If you see something, say something. Don't be afraid. They got the law in their hands, and they're going to get locked up forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm glad you acknowledged our appreciation of our police department, because obviously we want to lessen the load on them, men and women. And think about this. In 2020, our police department seized 200 guns. Last year, 219 guns. That's 419 in the 2-year time span. This year alone, I believe, Detective Captain, we're over 70 so far. So 500 plus in less than 3 years. And we had some preliminary data from the prosecutor's office where about 195 people were arrested with firearms. 75 of those were released. And there's no telling what they would have done if they reoffended. In fact, when I spoke to Mayor Baraka, he talked about 20% of those that he had interviewed the year prior, the police interviewed prior, they reoffended. So we want to stop that rate of recidivism as far as gun violence is concerned. And this past weekend, my friend Mark Albies shared a column from Maureen Dowd. And it talked about Mayor Eric Adams, who I don't envy, but I admire. And it was entitled aptly, "The Mayor Who Doesn't Sleep." I'm sure there's a lot of mayors who don't sleep, and it's most likely because of gun violence. And he, with his considerable background in law enforcement, talked about how we can't have laws that protect violent offenders. And so I believe we speak as one, in unison, to our friend right across the river, Mayor Eric Adams. We could relate to what you're going through. Probably not in the same, it's probably not on the same scale. However, we've taken definitive action as far as legislation is concerned to make sure that violent offenders are put behind bars and stay there. We're hoping that your legislature in New York follows suit in the leadership of our legislators here in New Jersey, because whether it's fighting a virus or violence, it's all about saving lives and putting the people that we protect and serve, or making sure that the people that we protect and serve are not in harm's way. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone. Yes, question.
Henry with Pix 11. Picking
Hi.
up kind of where you left off, a two-part question. Why do you think New Jersey has been able to strike this balance? You have already had the public safety assessment in place, which New York does not have.
Right.
Dangerousness standard, it's sometimes called.
Sure.
Now you have more stringent restrictions on gun crime arrests. Why do you think New Jersey's been able to strike that balance? And why wasn't the public safety assessment already kind of grabbing most of these gun cases and saying, hey, no bail or no low bail?
Well, I have to credit our state senator, Joe Cryan. I have to thank our state assemblyman, Benji Wimberly, because they listened, right? It's the mayors, it's the police departments that have to get the text messages, that have to get the phone calls. We have that data that we share. Thank you, Public Safety Director Jerry Spezial. But those are the most difficult text messages or phone calls that anyone could ever receive, whether it was a fatal or non-fatal shooting. I mean, arguably, a homicide hurts more. But that's the impetus behind it. And that's why I was making that personal plea to Eric Adams or his state legislature in New York to say, look, we've done it here in New Jersey. You should follow suit in your state as well, because, like I stated before, it's a life or death matter. And he's not sleeping, and I can relate to what he's experiencing, because when the Detective Captain Pat Murray texts me or calls me at 2:30 in the morning, it's not something I'm looking forward to. And I'm sure that no mayor is looking forward to a text message from their public safety director either.
As for the public, I don't know if one of the other
You wanna-
perhaps law enforcement experts or state legislator experts, why wasn't the public safety assessment kind of holding more of these cases, in your opinion?
You know, in my opinion, obviously, as the Senate and the Assemblyman said, this was supposed to be a living, breathing document, and I think it kind of went off on the rails to where it became, this is the way it is, and then we had the score sheet, and we were dealing with that score sheet, and people were falling through the cracks. So as a result of that, they had the ammunition in their pocket so that they could show the data from people like Captain Pat Murray that said, you know, 75 of the violent offenders that I took with weapons off of the street are released or reoffend. So that recidivism, I think, is what tied everybody together, you know, from a law enforcement perspective, anyone that understood it, that this is what we need to do. You know, New York has a little bit of a different battle because they use an algorithm and a computer. So that's a little bit, you know, it kind of takes away the judicial discretion. This bill allows for people with guns to be held responsible, violent offenders to be held responsible. We don't have to worry about an algorithm. We can now hold you, and my captain doesn't have to be up on the pond catching and releasing, because that's not the way to make a safer city. Thank you.
I would just like to say we look forward to working with the Paterson Police Department as well as all the other municipalities in Passaic County to reduce the gun violence. We all know that it's a pressing issue that we must address, and I thank again the legislator for taking the initiative and making that so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you give us a specific example of the kind of offender with a firearm who was being released and would not be released now? Someone who does what?
Detective, oh, he just got a phone call. I was going to have him address that. If there's another question, then we can get back to him because he has the specific information.
Senator, what
Senator.
offense?
Armed robbery is an easy one.
Can you come over here, please?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
apologize.
Carjacking.
Carjacking, armed robbery, stand right out. Obviously, anywhere where there's an actual shooting of a weapon. And so in previous instances, and by the way, those numbers are around 2,000 to 3,000 perpetrators in New Jersey, right? And Benji mentioned, and I think the mayor did as well, where the majority of those folks tend to reside or where those crimes are perpetrated, over 60% in 5 cities. So think of those kind of examples, that carjacking victim who's got a weapon there, that there's no longer a presumption of bail for that perpetrator.
Domestic violence?
DV is not part, DV would be part of the point system, it's not. DV would not be presumptive that way, to my knowledge.
What kinds
Correct me
of
if I'm wrong. Am I wrong?
Yeah, we use the ODARA system, so
So
yeah.
so it would be, I apologize.
We-
Spezial just corrected me. Okay,
Domestic violence would be included.
excuse me?
Domestic violence?
Domestic violence would be included.
What amendments did you have to make? What changes did you have to make to the original bill to get to this point?
Sure, the largest one was, and with the cooperation and the leadership of the Assemblyman and the mayor, was we had too broad a base. So what we did is we limited it to certain definitions and then ultimately the presumption definition itself. So we had encompassed, I mentioned to you a few thousand folks that are encompassed in this bill. The original number was more than 20,000. And the courts felt, and by the way, I again want to reach out to advocates like the courts and others who felt that it was just too broad a scope. And you all know and have seen the conversations about where the judiciary is these days in terms of trying to keep up with a backlog. So we were able to make those adjustments. I'd be remiss if I did get a chance. I really want to give a shout out to Senator Linda Greenstein, who chairs the Law and Public Safety Committee. Twice we put the bill up, twice we worked offline into amendments, and she was more than gracious in terms of being able to ultimately get it through on a bipartisan basis, as the mayor mentioned.
To put a button on a number you just threw out, you're thinking this will hold between 2,000 and 3,000 more gun offenders?
They will be, if you use the data provided, they will be folks that are part of this legislation's current, for lack of a better way to put it, I'm missing the right word here, but they are the folks that are captured in this. How many of them are released, not released, is certainly still ultimately the decision of a judge.
That's right. Okay. Thank you. And to your question, I won't take it really granular, but we had to take a phone call, and that was Detective Captain Pat Murray could have elaborated a little further on that. Any other questions? Alex, Sedan, thanks for joining us.
Just a question for anyone who wants to answer it. Does this mean that especially the members of the legislature are walking back the commitment to social justice, especially the commitment made in the wake of George Floyd?
Yeah, okay.
I can answer that totally. That is definitely not the case. And I would never insult the leadership such as Bonnie Watson Coleman and our community. I mean, we understand the disproportionate amount of people of color that went to jail for small crimes, and I would never support anything like that. I mean, if you look at the numbers 2 years ago in the state of New Jersey, I think at that point there were 18,000 people incarcerated in the state. 11,000 were people of color, if not more. So we understand they only made up 13% of the population, meaning the African-American population. The disproportions we would continue to watch. There's no way would we insult any social justice or moving forward for any of the members of any of the residents of New Jersey.
I just want to add, Alex, this is not about mass incarceration. This is about reducing recidivism with gun violence and those that are being shot down as a result of handguns, illegal. Thank you.
Yeah, so for example, I mean, the impetus behind the actual legislation was individuals who were incarcerated, who spent months in jail, maybe sometimes, some cases, years, because they couldn't pay a parking ticket or there was an issue with, they were in arrears with child support. So that's the intended, that was the aim, that was the spirit of the legislation. But we are addressing violent offenders who should be behind bars so that they don't put people in danger. I also want to acknowledge our Director of Public Policy and Planning who worked with me on this issue, Ishia Hayes. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Alex. Thanks for joining us. I recommend everyone read the Maureen Dowd column on Mayor Eric Adams, who doesn't sleep, and hopefully we can get a little bit more sleep, thanks to our state legislators and the team that's up here today. Thank you.